Alisa Martin's first day as an intern at Dax Corp was supposed to be the start of something great. She had imagined herself walking confidently through the grand corporate lobby, shaking hands with important people, and making a strong first impression. Instead, fate had other plans. Her morning had already been a disaster before she even stepped into the towering office building. First, the city bus broke down, forcing her to scramble for a taxi. Then, the cab driver took the scenic route, unintentionally, making her even later. By the time she arrived, the wind had turned her neatly styled hair into a tangled mess. But the real catastrophe was yet to come. As she sprinted across the marble floor toward the elevator, she saw the doors closing. "Wait! Hold the elevator," she shouted, her heels clicking against the floor. A moment later, she barely squeezed through just before the doors shut. Unfortunately, her momentum sent her crashing into a tall, sharply dressed man, nearly knocking him off balance. "Oh!" Alisa gasped as she steadied herself. The man, who had been looking at his phone, barely had time to react before a sharp pain shot through his foot. "You stepped on me," he stated, looking down at his now slightly scuffed Italian leather shoes. "It wasn't intentional," she said quickly, raising her hands defensively. "But if it makes you feel any better, my foot hurts too." Before he could respond, his phone, which had flown out of his hand during the impact, hit the elevator floor with a loud thud. Alisa picked it up, praying it was still intact. "See? Modern phones are tough," she offered with a nervous smile. The man pressed the power button. The screen flickered, cracked. He let out a deep sigh, rubbing his temples as if summoning patience. "Fantastic." As if the universe wasn't done tormenting her, the elevator suddenly jolted and stopped between floors. The lights flickered. Silence. Alisa swallowed hard, looking around. Is this part of the building's modern aesthetic? The man ignored her attempt at humor, pressing the emergency button impatiently. Stuck in an elevator. On her first day. With a stranger whose expensive shoes she had just ruined. Little did she know, this wasn't just any stranger, this was Ethan Fiser, the CEO of Dax Corporation. And this was just the beginning. Alisa Martin had always prided herself on her ability to bounce back from disaster. And after her mortifying elevator encounter with the CEO, she told herself that things could only go up from there. Unfortunately, she was wrong. The moment she stepped into the office, she could already hear the whispers. "That's the intern who almost took out Mr. Fiser in the elevator. I heard she stomped on his foot, smashed his phone, and locked him in with her. No way, she did all that on her first day." Alisa tried to walk with confidence, pretending not to hear. "It's fine," she thought. "I'm here to work, not to make a social impression." But her plan to remain invisible failed the second she reached her desk. Melissa, her supervisor, welcomed her with a polite but wary smile. "I hope you're ready to work. Our department values structure and precision." Alisa beamed. "Of course. I'm super organized." At that exact moment, her overstuffed bag slipped from her shoulder, knocking over a neatly stacked pile of reports from a colleague's desk. Papers fluttered to the floor in a dramatic cascade. The room went silent. "Oh," Alisa muttered, crouching down. "That was a test, right?" Melissa sighed. "Just follow me." Alisa was handed her first assignment, sorting and summarizing financial reports. It seemed simple enough. Until she opened the folder and saw the numbers. Charts. Graphs. Spreadsheets. A jungle of financial data that made no sense to her exhausted brain. After 20 minutes of staring at the numbers, she decided on a brilliant solution. She labeled the spreadsheets with sticky notes to help her remember them. The one with declining profits? The sadness chart? The budget sheet filled with red numbers? The bankruptcy table? The overly complex forecast report? The roller coaster of despair? Feeling accomplished, she continued her work until Melissa returned. "How's it going?" Alisa jumped at the sound of her voice, knocking over her coffee in the process. A dark stain spread across the spreadsheets. Melissa stared at the mess, then at Alisa. "How much coffee do you drink per day?" "Not enough to handle this," Alisa muttered, grabbing napkins. Before she could fully process her latest disaster, a wave of murmurs spread across the office. "The CEO is coming." Ethan Fiser walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. The employees straightened up. Alisa did her best to blend into her chair. Then, her worst nightmare came true. The stack of documents she had just organized slipped from her desk and landed directly at Ethan's feet. He looked at the papers, then at her. Alisa gave him a weak smile. "Oh. Hi again." Ethan picked up a report, flipping through it. He paused. "Why is this chart labeled the sadness chart?" The office fell into dead silence. Alisa felt her soul leave her body. I can explain." Ethan slowly closed the report. This better be a really good explanation. Her brain scrambled for an answer. Finally, she blurted out, "Well, if I were a chart, that's what I'd be called too." A long pause. Then, Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly trying to summon patience. "Change the names." Alisa nodded frantically. "Right away, sir." Ethan gave her one last look before muttering something under his breath about how the company kept attracting chaotic geniuses. The moment he left, the office erupted into whispers. "Oh my God, you survived. I thought he was going to fire you on the spot." Alisa collapsed into her chair. "At least he didn't throw a stapler at me. I'll count that as a win." And just like that, her first day at Dax Corp came to a chaotic, yet oddly triumphant, close. Despite her disastrous first day, Alisa Martin somehow managed to keep her internship at Dax Corporation. Even more surprising, Ethan Fiser, the no-nonsense CEO, hadn't fired her. Instead, he seemed curious. It started with small things. He would glance her way in meetings, as if waiting for her to say something unpredictable. When she worked late, she'd occasionally catch him walking by, lingering for just a moment before continuing on. He never said much, but there was something about the way he observed her, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. One evening, Alisa was alone in the office, finishing a report. The silence was too much, so she put on her headphones and played her favorite upbeat music. Before she knew it, she was dancing, twisting in her chair, using a stapler as a microphone, and fully lost in her own world. Then, she heard a cough. Freezing mid-spin, she slowly turned around. Ethan stood at the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with an unreadable expression. She dropped the stapler. "I can explain." He raised an eyebrow. "I'd love to hear this." Thinking fast, she blurted, "Studies show that dancing improves productivity." Ethan smirked. "What studies?" "Oh, lots. Respected scientific research. Published by experts in, productive dancing." For the first time, she saw something unexpected. Ethan Fiser laughed. Not a smirk. Not an exasperated sigh. A real, genuine laugh. He shook his head. "Just finished the report." As he turned to leave, He glanced at her one last time. By the way, the spin in the chair was impressive. The next morning, Alisa tried to act normal. But something had shifted. Ethan wasn't just tolerating her presence, he was paying attention. The office took notice, too. People whispered when he called her into meetings. Others stared when he asked for her input. The rumors spread like wildfire. One day, Melissa approached her at the coffee station. "You know the office is convinced you and Ethan have something going on, right?" Alisa nearly choked on her coffee. "What? No. That's ridiculous." Melissa smirked. "Maybe. But I've worked here for 5 years, and I've never seen him take an interest in anyone like this." Alisa brushed it off. "He's my boss. That's all." But then came the dinner invitation. "The CEO needs someone from our department to attend a business dinner with him tonight," Melissa said. "And you're the only one available." Alisa blinked. "Wait. The CEO? As in Ethan?" Melissa gave her a knowing look. "That's the one." Panic rose in her chest. "I can't go. I have plans." "What plans?" "I have to, feed my fish." "You don't have a fish." "I could get one." Melissa sighed. "You don't have a choice. Be there at 8. That night, as Alisa walked into the elegant restaurant, she spotted Ethan already seated at a private table. He looked up as she approached, raising an eyebrow. Before he could say anything, she sat down and sighed. "Just so you know, I'm here under duress." Ethan smirked. "I'll have the waiter write that down." Alisa picked up the menu, her eyes widening at the prices. "There's a dish here that costs more than my fridge." Ethan leaned back. "Order it if you want." "I'd rather keep my fridge. At least it lasts longer than 5 minutes." Ethan chuckled, actually chuckled. Alisa blinked. She had somehow made the most intimidating CEO in the building laugh twice in 2 days. Something was definitely changing. The morning after the business dinner, the office was buzzing with gossip. The intern went to dinner with the CEO. "I heard they had a private table in some fancy restaurant. Maybe she's the reason he's been acting different lately." Alisa Martin could feel the weight of the whispers as she walked to her desk. She tried to ignore them, but Melissa, her ever-observant supervisor, wasn't about to let it go. "So," Melissa said, sliding into the chair next to her. "How was dinner?" Alisa sighed, rubbing her temples. "It was a business dinner. Nothing more." Melissa smirked. And yet, the CEO has never taken an intern to dinner before." Alisa waved her off. "It wasn't like that. He needed someone from our department, and I was the only one available." Melissa leaned in. "And did you notice how he looked at you?" Alisa opened her mouth to argue but hesitated. Had Ethan looked at her differently? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that the evening had been surprisingly easy. Comfortable. And the way he had chuckled at her jokes, it wasn't something she'd ever expected from a man like him. But there was no time to dwell on it. Because the next rumor hit the office like a storm. The CEO is engaged. Alisa nearly spilled her coffee when she overheard 2 coworkers whispering by the break room. "Wait, what?" she blurted out. One of them turned to her. "You didn't hear? Apparently, it's an arranged marriage. Some high society deal." Alisa felt something tighten in her chest. "Are you sure?" "Well, he hasn't denied it." For the rest of the day, Alisa tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. If it was true, why hadn't he said anything? By the time the workday ended, she couldn't take it anymore. She stormed up to the executive floor, knocked on Ethan's office door, and walked in before he could respond. He glanced up from his paperwork. "Alisa?" She crossed her arms. "Are you engaged?" Ethan's brows lifted. He leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction. "What makes you think that?" She frowned. "The entire office is talking about it." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Office gossip spreads faster than facts." "So, it's not true?" she pressed. Ethan hesitated. "Depends on how you look at it." Her stomach dropped. "That is a terrible answer." He gave a small, amused smile. "And if it were true, would it matter to you?" Alisa blinked. She hadn't expected that question. "No. I mean," she hesitated. "I just think it's odd that you didn't mention it." Ethan watched her for a moment, then returned to his paperwork. "I think you already have your answer." Alisa left his office feeling more confused than ever. That night, as she lay in bed, one thought wouldn't leave her mind. Why did it bother me so much? The engagement rumor refused to die down. It seemed like every time Alisa entered the office, another whispered conversation was unfolding around her. "Did you hear? The CEO's fiancée is a socialite." "No, I heard she's a powerful businesswoman from overseas." "I bet the intern knows the truth." Alisa tried to block it all out. It wasn't any of her business, except she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her chest. The possibility of Ethan being engaged shouldn't have mattered, but it did. And then, something even more unexpected happened. One morning, as she was settling into her desk, a senior employee approached her. "Alisa, Mr. Fiser wants to see you in his office." She blinked. "Now?" The man nodded. Alisa took a deep breath, bracing herself. She had no idea what this was about, but with her luck, it could be anything from another reprimand to an accidental termination. When she entered Ethan's office, he was already looking at her, fingers laced together on his desk. "Close the door," he said. Alisa's stomach twisted. "That sounds serious." Ethan gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit." She did, crossing her arms. "What's going on?" Ethan exhaled. "Logan Pierce called me this morning." Alisa's eyes widened. "The Logan Pierce?" He nodded. "He wants to offer you a job." For a moment, she thought she misheard. "Me? Why?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "He thinks you have potential." Alisa let out a nervous laugh. "That doesn't make sense. I'm just an intern." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "Do you really believe that?" She hesitated. He leaned forward slightly. "Logan doesn't do anything without an ulterior motive. He's trying to use you to get to me." Alisa swallowed. "That sounds dramatic." "It is dramatic," Ethan admitted. "Because it's real." She frowned. "Do you want me to take the offer?" He didn't answer right away. His blue eyes locked onto hers, unreadable. "I want to know what you want." Alisa sat back, trying to process everything. "I don't trust Logan." Ethan nodded slightly, as if he'd been expecting that answer. After a long pause, she sighed and gave him a small smile. "Don't worry, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere." Something in his posture eased. But just as she was about to stand up, he spoke again. "I have a proposal for you." Alisa froze. "A proposal?" He nodded. There's a corporate event tomorrow. I need a date. She stared at him. You're asking me to be your date? Yes. She laughed nervously. Is this some kind of trap? No. She folded her arms. Why me? Ethan tilted his head slightly. Because I need someone who isn't boring. Alisa huffed. That was almost a compliment. He smirked. Take it however you like. She hesitated. The office is already full of rumors. If I go with you, people will assume. Let them assume, Ethan interrupted. She exhaled. Fine. But on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. What is it? You can't leave me alone at this thing. Ethan's lips quirked up. So, you want me to stay close? Alisa rolled her eyes. It just means I don't want to be thrown into a sea of strangers. He nodded. Deal. As she walked out of his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something far more complicated than she'd anticipated. The corporate event was held in one of the most luxurious venues in the city, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the crowd of executives, investors, and high-profile business figures. As Alisa stepped out of the car, she smoothed down her dress, taking a deep breath. This wasn't her world. Ethan Fiser, as always, looked effortlessly composed, his tailored suit perfectly in place. When she approached, he gave her a once-over and nodded in approval. You clean up well, he remarked. Alisa huffed. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. As they walked inside, all eyes turned toward them. The quiet hum of conversation shifted as guests whispered amongst themselves. Alisa didn't have to hear what they were saying, she already knew. Who is she? Is that the intern everyone's been talking about? Why would Ethan bring her? She tried to ignore it, but the weight of their stares made her stomach twist. Ethan must have sensed her discomfort because he leaned in slightly and said, Relax. They're just curious. Curious about what? She muttered. About us. That didn't help. Before she could respond, an elegant woman approached. She was striking, poised, confident, and clearly someone important. Her sharp gaze flickered to Alisa before settling on Ethan. Ethan, darling, she said smoothly. It's been too long. Ethan gave a polite nod. Olivia. Alisa instantly recognized the name. Olivia Weston, one of the biggest investors in the industry. Olivia's eyes lingered on Alisa with thinly veiled curiosity. And who is this? Ethan's response was simple. Alisa Martin. My guest for the evening. Olivia's lips curved into a knowing smile. Interesting. Alisa forced a polite smile, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia was analyzing her like a piece of a puzzle. As Olivia walked away, Alisa exhaled. That wasn't intimidating at all. She likes to understand the situation, Ethan said casually. Oh, so that means she's trying to figure out what's going on between us. Ethan glanced at her, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. And do you think something is going on between us? Alisa opened her mouth, then quickly shut it. She didn't have an answer for that. Before she could dwell on it, another man approached, one who instantly changed the atmosphere. Ah, the woman of the moment, he said, his tone amused. Alisa turned and found herself face to face with Logan Pierce. Excuse me, she asked, brow raised. Logan smiled. Everyone here is trying to figure out who you are. Before she could respond, Ethan stepped forward, his expression hardening. Pierce. Logan's smirk widened. Fiser. Alisa's eyes flicked between them, sensing the tension. "You two know each other?" "We've worked on opposite sides a few times," Logan said smoothly. "And we still do," Ethan added coolly. The conversation between them was brief but loaded with something deeper. Alisa could feel it. After Logan walked away, she turned to Ethan. "Okay. What was that about?" "Nothing you need to worry about." She folded her arms. "You clearly don't like him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't like when he gets too close." Alisa's stomach flipped, but before she could ask what that meant, another round of introductions pulled them back into the evening. Yet, as the night continued, one thing became clear: this was no longer just a game. By the time the evening was winding down, Alisa Martin felt drained. The corporate event had been a whirlwind of polite conversations, intense stares, and carefully veiled whispers. Every handshake, every introduction, every questioning glance had reminded her of one simple fact: she didn't belong in this world. Ethan Fiser, on the other hand, thrived in it. He moved through the room with ease, his presence commanding attention without effort. He wasn't just respected, he was feared, admired, and carefully analyzed by everyone in attendance. And tonight, Alisa was part of that scrutiny simply because she had arrived at his side. She tried to stay composed, but her exhaustion betrayed her when she reached for a drink at the refreshment table and nearly knocked over a crystal glass. A voice beside her chuckled. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." She turned to find Logan Pierce standing beside her, watching her with that same amused expression he always wore. She sighed. "Is it that obvious?" "To everyone but Ethan, apparently." She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Logan took a sip of his wine. "He's never brought anyone to these events before. Not like this. So naturally, people are curious." She crossed her arms. "And you? What's your theory?" Logan smiled, but there was something sharp beneath it. "I think you've thrown him off balance. And I don't think he likes it." Before she could respond, a familiar presence appeared behind her. "Pierce." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. Logan smirked. "Ah, the man of the hour." He turned back to Alisa. "It was a pleasure, Ms. Martin. I hope we meet again." With that, he walked away, leaving an uncomfortable silence between her and Ethan. She turned to him. "Okay, seriously, what is going on between you two?" Ethan exhaled. "Logan enjoys pushing boundaries. And he enjoys testing people." She studied him. "And he was testing me?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I don't like when he gets too close." Something in his tone made her heart skip. She wasn't sure what to do with that information, so she defaulted to humor. "Is this where you dramatically say because you belong to me?" Ethan smirked. "That would be a little much, don't you think?" "Just a bit." Before she could overthink the moment, another executive approached Ethan, pulling him into conversation. Alisa took the opportunity to slip away for some air. She stepped onto the balcony, inhaling deeply. The night air was crisp, a stark contrast to the warmth of the crowded ballroom. She heard the door open behind her. "You disappeared," Ethan said, stepping beside her. "I needed a break from the spectacle." He nodded. "Understandable." They stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the city lights. Then, without looking at her, Ethan said, "You handled tonight well." She let out a dry laugh. "If by well, you mean I didn't set anything on fire, then yes, I suppose I did." He turned to face her fully. "You think you don't belong here?" She hesitated. Because I don't. Ethan studied her for a long moment before saying, "You belong wherever you decide to be." Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. For the first time that night, she didn't feel like just another outsider in his world. And that was more terrifying than anything. The morning after the corporate event, Alisa Martin walked into the office expecting to get back to her normal routine. She wanted nothing more than to focus on her work and push aside the lingering thoughts about Ethan Fiser, the way he had looked at her, the way his words from the night before still echoed in her mind. But as soon as she stepped inside, she knew normal was no longer an option. The whispers started immediately. "Did you see them together last night? He never brings a date to these things, especially not an intern. Something is definitely going on." Alisa gritted her teeth and headed straight to her desk, determined to ignore it all. But Melissa, her ever-curious supervisor, was already waiting for her. So, Melissa leaned in. "How was your date with the CEO?" Alisa groaned. It was not a date. It was a business event. Melissa smirked. "Right. And that's why he barely let you out of his sight all night?" Alisa waved a hand. "He was just making sure I didn't embarrass the company." Melissa's smirk widened. "Or maybe he just wanted to be near you." Before Alisa could respond, her email notification chimed. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. Subject: CEO's office. Now. Melissa peeked over her shoulder. Oof. He's not wasting any time. Alisa took a deep breath and made her way to Ethan's office, determined to keep things professional. When she stepped inside, he was already standing by the window, his back to her. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. He turned around, his expression unreadable. "Close the door." Her pulse quickened, but she did as he asked. Ethan studied her for a moment before speaking. "Logan Pierce called me this morning." Alisa blinked. "Again?" Ethan nodded. "He wants you to work for him." She froze. "What?" "He made an offer. A very generous one." Alisa stared at him, waiting for him to continue. But instead of trying to convince her to stay, he simply asked, "Are you considering it?" She frowned. "Do you want me to consider it?" His jaw tightened. "I want to know what you want." She hesitated before answering. "I don't trust Logan. And I like working here." For the first time, Ethan's expression shifted. There was something, relief, that flickered across his face. "Good," he finally said. Alisa narrowed her eyes. "Why do I feel like you already knew he was going to do this?" Ethan exhaled. "Because Logan never does anything without a reason. And right now, his reason is you." She swallowed hard. "That sounds unsettling." Ethan met her gaze. "It is." A silence stretched between them, heavy with something unspoken. Then, Ethan stepped closer. "There's something else," he said. Alisa's heart pounded. "What?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, in a voice quieter than she had ever heard from him, he said, "Logan figured something out." She swallowed. "What?" Ethan held her gaze. "That you're important to me." The air between them changed. Alisa felt her breath catch, her mind scrambling to process his words. For the first time, Ethan Fiser wasn't hiding behind his usual guarded demeanor. And suddenly, nothing between them felt the same anymore. Life often takes us in directions we never expect. Alisa and Ethan's journey reminds us that sometimes, the best things happen when we embrace the unexpected. Alisa, a young intern who felt out of place in a world of powerful executives, never imagined that her biggest mistakes would lead to her greatest opportunities. But through humor, resilience, and a willingness to be herself, she found not just success, but love. For those of us who have lived through decades of experiences, this story is a reminder that life doesn't follow a perfect script. Sometimes, the connections that shape us the most come from the most unlikely circumstances. Whether in work, relationships, or personal growth, embracing new challenges with an open heart can lead to deeper meaning and joy. Ethan, a man set in his ways, found that change wasn't something to fear, it was something that could bring happiness he never expected. No matter our age, we are never too old to learn, to grow, and to allow new people to change our lives for the better. Because in the end, the most meaningful moments often come from life's beautiful, unpredictable chaos.